Drawing your spirit animal is easier than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it, no matter your skill level. Hello wonderful people, it's Genevieve, and my goal here on this channel is to teach you all about illustration and design. So if you're new, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekly videos, and so that you can join our wonderful creative community. And with that said, grab your drawing tools, and let's get started. One quick thing I want to say before we start is that yes, I'm going to use this jackalope as the example, but I'm also going to give you tips and tricks on how to customize this piece to make it your own. So you don't necessarily have to draw a rabbit with antlers, with like leaves and mushrooms. I'm going to show you how to customize it to draw a different animal with a different background so that it suits your own preferences, I guess. So as usual, the first thing we're going to do is create a new canvas so that we have somewhere to draw. Now for reference, these are the dimensions of the canvas I will be using in this video. It's literally just the size of the iPad screen because this is just a demo, so it doesn't really matter. But make sure you pick dimensions that work for your own project requirements. And if you're not exactly sure how to pick a canvas size, I have a video in which I teach you everything you need to know in order to make a decision, so I will link that in the description below. Another question I often get is how to have the little reference image here at the top. It's quite simple. All you have to do is go in the wrench icon menu right here, then in the canvas submenu, and you're going to be able to activate reference right here. So it's just a little toggle, you activate that, and then it's going to let you import an image to use as your reference. So if you want to use my illustration as your reference, it will be linked in the description below. It's totally free, and it's going to be with the illustration color palette, that I'm going to use in this video. Though I do want to say that since this is an illustration that you can customize, I'm also going to be giving you pointers on how to create your own color palette, so you don't necessarily need to use the same as mine for this tutorial. Now with that said, we're going to start by simply changing the color of the background so it's not white. As you can see here, I'm going with a blue, but you can really go with any hue of your choice, so any kind of what we call color usually. But make sure that it's pretty much in the middle of your color selector here. So you don't want something too bright, nothing too dark, nothing too saturated, nothing too gray, pretty much in the middle, but with any hue of your choice. If you have the palette, if you want to follow along, it is right here at the top, this blue on the top left corner. And we're going to start this whole project just by breaking down the character in the background in basic shape and doing a super rough sketch. So for that, go ahead and create a new layer and rename it to Sketch. Now for the sketch, you can really use any color of your choice because we're not going to see this sketch in the final result, so it doesn't matter. Just make sure that you can see the color really well over the background color, of course. I'm going to go with a neutral gray. And you might have noticed that this little guy right here is actually the cover of my brand new inking, stippling, and texture bundle. Now I'm really excited about these new brushes because they are great for adding a lot of life and texture and personality to illustrations as well as photographs. So if you want to check out this bundle, it will be linked in the description below, and there's a special promo code for the YouTube people. And these are the brushes I personally will be using in this tutorial. That being said, don't worry, if you cannot buy special brushes, that's totally okay. I know it's not accessible to everyone, so I'm going to suggest free brushes that come with Procreate that you can use, and totally you're gonna get great result no matter which brushes you're using. Especially for the sketch, since we're not going to see it in the final result, the brush really doesn't matter much. Just make sure you have a brush that you're comfortable with. So that could be, for example, in the sketching panel from Procreate, the HB pencil. Or if you have the inking, stippling, and texture bundle, go ahead and in the inking pack, pick the sketching brush. So we're going to start our sketch with just a circle for the skull. So something kind of like this. And when I say, a circle, you can see it doesn't need to be a perfect shape at all. All we want at this stage is to roughly map out the different parts of our illustration. Think about the composition, so the size of everything, the position of everything, but not, the cleanliness of everything. So something that resembles a circle is good enough. Now, if we were to draw, a human head, which I've done a bunch of tutorials about that, so I'm going to use that as an example. At this stage, we would, have the circle, so the skull, and then we would draw what I call the vertical middle line to help us see what the direction of the head is. Maybe a horizontal line as well. So you can go ahead and do that. And then what we would do is we would sketch the jaw, so just drawing a basic kind of shape like that. Now for animals, it's slightly different because, we don't necessarily have the same kind of jaw. The nose and the mouth usually are on another type of circle, but the circle, the size of it and the positioning of it is going to depend on the animal, of course. So for example, if you're drawing a horse has a very long face. So the part of the face that has the nose and the mouth is going to be pretty far away from the rest of the skull. So you would draw your circle, you know, really far away from the main circle. If you're drawing an animal like a cat, some sort of dogs, or in my case, a rabbit, or, you know, a jackalope, the face is pretty squished together. So you're going to draw the front of the face pretty close to your main circle. So at this stage, this is already one opportunity you have to customize your animal. Just experiment with the different positioning of the second oval, and once you're happy with it, you know, all you have to do is draw another slightly curved vertical line to kind of continue this direction of the face that we had going on. So with that base, what we have to do now is mapping out the other elements that characterize your animal. So you have a lot of customization you can do just in the ears alone, but also the nose and the eyes, if you have any kind of antlers or horns. So really, you have the basic structure, and you're just going to use other basic shapes and forms to map out the rest of your character. So once I have this, usually I personally like to move on adding the ears, and for that, I like to just first map out where they connect with the head. So with just two little ovals like this, and then mapping out the general shape of the ears. So my rabbit here, well, my jackalope, just very thin, long ears. If you're drawing, I don't know, a panda or a bear, you would have round ears. You know, you get the idea. It's the same technique, the same structure, you just change the basic shape. If you have any other kind of feature on the head, you could sketch them right now. I like to draw a little hair kind of on top of the head, so I'm just gonna quickly map that out. You might have a horn if you're drawing a rhino or something, so you would sketch that now. In my case, I'm going to sketch some antlers. I like to start drawing antlers with just a basic boomerang shape like this. Very simple, or a banana shape, however you want to call it, on both sides. And then depending on the type of antler you're drawing, you're just going to refine it by adding some little stubby pieces. You know, that depends on the species you're drawing. Now at this stage, you know, when you have the top of the head done, you could go ahead and do either the eyes or the nose. That's a personal preference. That also depends on the animal you're drawing. I think maybe here the eyes actually are going to be the best next thing to do. And the positioning of the eyes is also going to depend on the animal you're drawing, but quite often it's going to be along the horizontal middle line that we sketch on the skull. Now here in my rabbit case, it's actually going to also be connecting with the front part of the face, so in this intersection right here essentially. And for now, all you have to do is draw some sort of an ellipse, mostly just figuring out where the eye is going to be and roughly the size of the eyes. It doesn't have to be the shape of the eye for now. Now the other side of the face is going to have a bit more of a hidden eye, you know, because there's an angle to the head. So you can just quickly sketch one little line like that. Now for the nose, same thing as the rest, you get the idea by now. The shape is really going to depend on the animal. I personally like for most animal except, I don't know, like a bird, that would be, you know, a beak instead of like a round shape. But for the nose, I like to just draw a pretty big rounded triangle. And that one you're also going to make sure it's aligned with the vertical line that we have on the front of the face. If you're drawing an animal like a horse or a rhino or something that doesn't necessarily have the specific nose like that, you might have some nostrils instead. So the nostrils, kind of similarly to the eyes, you're just going to map them out on either sides of your vertical line. In my case, again, I'm drawing a jackalope, so I'm going to have this rounded triangle for my rabbit's little nose like that. And you can also add elements like teeth and whiskers. Here, my rabbit, I'm going to have pretty big teeth, so I'm just kind of changing the bottom shape of my front of the face shape. So instead of being, you know, this oval right here, I'm refining it so it's more of like a W at the bottom. And then adding big teeth. I want it to be a character that looks a little bit cartoon, so you can exaggerate the features if you want to do like that as well. Just refining the shape a little bit. Maybe adding some whiskers. That's pretty much it, honestly. Let's zoom out and check it out. Great. So honestly, once you've mapped out all the basic elements, it's probably going to look a little bit crazy, but that's okay. You know, when you work with basic shapes, they're really easy to move around, and that's the beauty of it. You know, the ear, yes, we know it's an ear, but essentially right now it's just a very pointy oval. So all we have to do when we have basic shapes and we're not super happy with either the positioning, the angle, or the size of them, when we're working in Procreate, you can simply select the selection tool here at the top, setting it to freehand, and then drawing a selection around a part of your character that you want to change. So let's say here I'm not super happy with this ear. I might go ahead and select it. And then once you have your selection, you use the arrow tool, either setting it to uniform if you want to just keep the same proportions, or distort if you want to change the proportions. You can then just go ahead and, either rotate, resize, reposition any shape that you're not happy with. So at this stage, don't necessarily think of your sketch as a whole animal. Just still think of it as different parts, different basic shapes that you can move around and customize until you kind of like the composition. That's not too bad. I'm going to move this antler as well. Maybe extend the face here a little bit. But yeah, honestly, something like this is good enough for your sketch. Now, you might notice that it's probably not going to be in the middle of your canvas. If that's the case, you can just use the arrow tool again to reposition your sketch and, setting it to uniform to resize it if you feel like you need to do that. So just make sure it's right where you want it to be. And once you have a rough sketch like this, you can move on to drawing the background. And the background in this project is really a place where I encourage you to have a whole lot of fun and customize your spirit animal. So draw stuff that you like. I personally really like nature and I like plants, so I have a bunch of leaves and some cool little mushrooms there. So you can draw whatever brings you happiness, whatever you collect. It could be, I don't know, cheese, pizza, donuts, chocolate, cookies. I guess I'm hungry right now. But whatever you like, it could be books. You get the idea. Make it so that the elements in the background make you happy and represent who you are as a person, or if you're gifting this to someone else, make it so that it represents the person that you're drawing this for. Anyway, so without going into all the details of the different elements, we're simply going to place them roughly in terms of, again, size and position. So you're not going to have to draw the specifics of, okay, all the lines within the leaves or all the lines within the mushroom. We just want to say, okay, I have a leaf here. Gonna draw this like that. Great. I have another one that could go well there, another one here. You get the idea. So if you were to draw donuts, you could draw like big circles and just roughly positioning them. So that's all you have to do for now, figuring out the composition of your piece and adding, taking away until you're happy with everything. Now, if you want to draw exactly the same as I am, we're going to draw leaves, and then we're going to draw little mushrooms. And for the mushroom, quite simple. All you have to do is draw some sort of a rounded triangle for the top of the mushroom, and then a stubby little base like this. So 2 simple shapes, really easy, and later we're going to refine them to make them look a little bit more interesting. And just like for the character, if you're not happy with the positioning of one of your background elements, all you have to do is use the selection tool, selecting it, oops, there you go, and then with the arrow tool you can quickly move it around. So make sure that at this stage your sketch, doesn't look clean and precise and nice, but make sure that it does look like a basic composition that you're happy with. So take all the time you need here to make sure you're happy with the composition. And once you are, don't worry about cleaning up the lines. We're going to move on straight to creating the line art. One tip I want to give you is when you have a sketch and you want to either add line art or colors around the sketch, you might want to change the blending mode of it to multiply. So in Procreate, all you have to do is tap on the little N right here next to the check mark and then selecting multiply at the very top. Now, why would you want to use multiply here for your sketch? Well, it's going to make it so that the sketch is always going to be different than what's underneath it. So that way you're never going to be confused with, okay, what's the sketch, what's the line art? You're always going to know because multiply is going to make the sketch look different no matter what is right under it. Now you might want though to lower the opacity of your sketch so it's not quite in your face and not quite as distracting. So it can be very, very low. I like to put it right before I can not see it well anymore, so 25% in this case. So once you have your sketch all set up, you're going to go ahead and create a new layer, put it below the sketch layer and rename it to outlines. So here, essentially, we're going to draw some really clean outlines. Instead of having this crazy sketch, we're going to just redraw everything, and we're going to use these outlines in the final result. You can see it's kind of a cartoon type of illustration, so we have really bold outlines, which is what we're going to do now. And for that, you have a few options in terms of brushes. If you're working with the free brushes that come with Procreate, you can go in the inking panel that comes with Procreate and pick pretty much anything you want in this panel. Honestly, there's a bunch of options. The syrup brush could work really well. I personally like the studio pen, it's pretty nice. So you can experiment with those. If you want a more rough kind of, pencil vibe, you could go in the sketching panel and pick the 6B pencil. That could work really well as well. But if you do have the brushes from my inking stippling texture bundle, you could go in the inking pack that comes with that. And honestly pick really any of the top brushes. So the smooth tracing or, bleeding ink or the brush pen, those could really work well. I'm gonna go, I think, with the smooth tracing for now. But essentially, you just want a brush that you like and you're comfortable with so you can draw clean outlines. And the size of the outlines is really, it's totally up to you. You can have very bold, thick lines. That might be a bit of an exaggeration, but there's not one specific size. You can experiment, try a few things, see what you like, and once you find a thickness that you're happy with, stick with that. Now for the colors of the outline, you have a bunch of options once more. You could go with a straight up black outline, or you could go with an outline that is going to be similar to the color of your character, but darker. Now for now, since we don't have the base color of the character, seriously pick any dark color and it's going to work well. I personally know that my character is going to be a kind of burnt orange, so I'm gonna go already with my dark red, but just pick whatever and we can change the color of it later. I'm going to show you how to do it. So this stage is really quite easy in the sense that it's nothing new, we're just using lines that we already have, but it is a little bit time consuming if you want to do it right. So at this stage, really there's no special secret here. It's all about drawing the outlines and that's it. So it's a very easy step in the sense that, it's not theory or whatever, but it is very important that you do it right because it's going to make such a big difference in the end if you have outlines that you're happy with to start, as opposed to outlines that are all kind of wobbly and not so nice. Now I say wobbly and I use my brush. The brush from the inking bundle or the inking pack in the inking stippling texture bundle, they do have a lot of stabilization to help you not have wobbly lines, so there's that, but you get the idea. One thing that I do want to suggest though, when you're drawing outlines, I'm going to do an example real quick. I'll tell you in a second. So let's say I'm drawing a line for the ear and then a line for the face. I'm not going to keep those, I'm going real quick, but whenever you have two parts that connect, usually the part that connects right here tends to be a little bit thicker, and that can really help with the visibility of the whole line art. So that's the only little theory part I'm going to tell you for the line art, but so I'm going to stop talking here to let you focus on drawing your line art, and I'm going to also have my video going in the background so you can use it as a reference if you need. And if you do look at it, you're going to notice that drawing line art is not necessarily a super linear process. It's much more about trial and error. So you might draw a line somewhere and then realize that it doesn't look quite right. Undo or erase it, move on to a different part of the illustration, try to draw your lines there, and kind of go back and forth between the different elements until you have your own line art. So don't worry if you struggle with a certain part of the animal, like I really struggle with one side of the face. Just leave it, move on to something else, and the more you build your illustration, the easier it's going to be to draw the weird parts. So just draw your line art, and once you're happy with it, we're going to move on to the next phase, so the colors. Great, so once you have your line art, the next thing you might want to do is go ahead and hide your sketch layer just to make sure that everything is exactly how you want it to be. If it's not the case, you can use the selection tool and arrow tool technique that we used before to move around stuff until you have, a line art that you're really happy with. So we're simply going to fill in the different sections with different colors. So for that, go ahead and create a new layer, put it below your outlines, and rename it to whatever animal you're drawing. So in my case, it's a rabbit, so I'm just going to go with that. And you're going to pick the main color you want to use for your animal. So that's going to depend, of course, on your own piece. I'm going to go with this super, super bright kind of red-orange color. And that's really the main color we're going to use to create the palette later. So make sure you're happy with this color and everything else is going to work well. I'm going to show you how to do that. But yeah, just pick the main color. And then you're going to go and in your layer panel, you're going to tap on the outline layer to activate or open the menu, I should say, and you're going to select a reference at the bottom. Now you can go back to your rabbit or any other animal layer. And since we have reference activated, we can simply drag the color onto a shape and it's going to fill it in. So that's really, really great. Now, one thing I do want to tell you is that if you used a brush that has some texture to it for your outlines or your line art, you're going to need to adjust the threshold. So without lifting it once you're dropping your color, you can just move it towards the left or towards the right to adjust and find the moment right before the color fills in the entire canvas like that. So just find the moment right before that and then lift the pencil. So all you have to do is fill in the entire shape of your character's head with one color. We're going to later change it. For now, we just want to have essentially a silhouette of the head. Now, if you have a bunch of little sections like I do in the antlers, I personally find it's easier to just fill in manually than to color drop the color, 50 times. So for big sections, it's really quick to use color drop, but for small section, it might actually be quicker to do it manually, especially if you have a pretty smooth big brush. You can do it in just a few strokes. Great, so once you have the colored silhouette of your animal, we're going to move on to the colored silhouette of the backgrounds, just so we can work on the color palette before going into all the details. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to put it below the rabbit or whatever other layer name you have and rename this one to background. Woo, background, there we go. So same thing, we're just going to color drop the color. Now, in order to have a coherent palette, you might be super good and you might be able to just say, okay, I want, this kind of green for the leaves, and it's going to work well with the other animal. Otherwise, all you have to do in Procreate is really great, just selecting your main color you use for your animal, and then in the color panel at the bottom, picking the harmony option right here. You're going to be able to, at the top, select different kind of color pairings, I guess, or color combinations from the color wheel. So whatever Procreate is going to suggest here is going to work well with your main color. So let's say I know I want a green. I'm just going to go through the different options until I find a green. So I would have one here, but let's say I experiment with tetradic instead. Tetradic. I think this green I like a little bit better. So I would go with this green, and if you select that, then you can go back to your classic option, and as long as you don't change the hue, you can change the saturation or the brightness, and it's going to work well with your base color. So that's a technique that you can use no matter what you're drawing. You find one color that you want, then you are happy with, and then you build the rest of the color palette depending on the different elements using the harmony tool. So here, just to be coherent with the color palette that I'm providing, I'm going to go with the screen right here. But essentially, it's the same technique that I did to find it. And you can just fill in same technique since we have the reference activated on the line art. Whoops. You can just use color drop to fill in the different shapes. And since I have a lot of details in the leaves like I did in the antlers, I'm personally going to go ahead and just manually fill them in. But if you have more simple shapes, you can use color drop. So if you have different kind of elements, I don't have just leaf, for example, I have mushrooms, you might want to go ahead and select the other color as well. So you could go in the harmony panel and picking in the other option. I know I want mine to be more of a teal, so that would be a teal. But in the palette that I'm providing, it would be this color. this kind of teal right here, right below the background color. Great, so once you have the basic silhouettes, we're just going to add a bit of color variation within them to make them more interesting. And to do that, we're going to make sure to deactivate the reference option, otherwise it's going to start doing really weird things, so like that. And we're going to activate what is called alpha lock on both the rabbit and the background layer. So to activate alpha lock, you can take 2 fingers and swipe your layers towards the right. Oops, there we go. And you're going to see a checkered pattern opening up, or showing up behind the shape, I should say. Or you could also just tap on a layer and from the layer menu, click on alpha lock. Now what alpha lock does is now whatever we draw on these layers is going to stay within the base shape that was already there. So for example, if I select my rabbit layer, you can see everything I draw stays within the silhouette. So that way we can very quickly add any kind of color variation we want. So for that, you might want to go ahead and use the same, technique, picking secondary colors that you know are going to work well with your base. Again, here, since I already picked them with my color palette, I know I'm going to go with this brown for the antlers. And you can stick with the same brush and just fill in the different shapes really quickly, since you don't have to worry about going outside of the lines. And with that, it is time for the secret password. So if you've watched this far in the video, please go ahead and leave me a comment, tell me which animal you're drawing and what's in the background. So in my case, it would be a jackalope with a bunch of leaves and some mushrooms. Now, if you're new on the channel, you might be like, what's the secret password? What is that all about? It's kind of a game that we're playing here. In every single video, I had at one point a secret password for you guys to find. And it does a few things. I mean, a lot of you like it, so that's one thing. But it also gives me a lot of insight into how to edit and pace my videos better, which helps me create better tutorials for you guys, so that's really great. And it's also really cool because you guys know me, you see my face in the intro, you hear my voice throughout the entire video, but I have no idea who you guys are. And whenever you leave a comment, no matter what the comment is, I get to sometimes see your face, sometimes see your name, and it's really cool to see who's part of the creative community that we're building here on this channel. So just leave a comment with whatever spirit animal you're drawing, and then we're going to keep going. So once you map out the different color areas of your character, you're going to do the same thing for the background if needed. Mine is pretty much all good, although maybe I'm going to change the color of the bottom part of the mushroom. So same thing, same technique. If you don't have a preset color palette, you can just pick the color of the mushroom, for example, and then playing with the different options until you find one that you like, going back, changing the lightness, darkness, saturation of it. And that way you know it's going to work well with the other colors you're working with. Now in my case, again, I have the color palette already, so for the bottom of the mushroom, it would be this light blue right here. Great, so now all we have to do is add a bit of light, a bit of shadow, work on the background, add a few textures, and we're going to be done. So we're done with the hardest part for sure. Now we just need to bring it to life and make it pop, because right now it's quite flat. So to do that, we're going to create a new layer above the rabbit layer, and we're going to rename this one to Shadows. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details about blending modes because I have a video all about them. You can check it out if you want. I will link a description below. But we're going to, for our shadow, use the blending mode Linear Burn, and we're going to lower the opacity around 50% for now. Now, using Linear Burn, again, without getting into all the details, is going to allow us to pick a color that has a bit of a tint to it. I like to go with shadows that are kind of cooler tones, so a gray with a bit of purple would work really well, gray with a bit of blue. And we're going to be able to use that same color and apply it everywhere as our shadow color. So you can see here it kind of adapts. Since we have the blending mode, it adapts and makes a darker red, a darker green, a darker blue. It just blends with whatever is below it. So that's really cool. But we're also going to apply this shadow layer as a clipping mask. So just tapping on the layer, selecting the clipping mask option. Essentially, it's going to do pretty much what Alpha Lock did on this rabbit layer. Whatever we draw on the shadow layer is now going to stay within the rabbit shape. Now, the reason we're creating a separate layer is so that we can, yes, stay within the shape, but also use a blending mode. So that's why we're creating a separate layer and using clipping mask instead of just staying on the rabbit shape that already has Alpha Lock. In terms of brushes here, you have a few options depending on the type of textures you want, I guess, in your shadows. So if you want super soft shadows, you could go in the free brush, so in the airbrushing panel from Procreate, and use the soft brush. Now if you watch my watercolor videos, make sure they bring the opacity of your brush back to 100%. If you want something that has a bit more texture for your shadows, you could stick with the 6B pencil from the sketching panel, but you're going to need to make it very big so that it covers a large area. So those are two free options you can for sure use. Otherwise, if you have my new bundle, you can go in the inking panel and pick the low ink marker. That would be a really nice option that has some grit to it. Or if you want something a bit smoother, you could go in the texture and grit part of the bundle and pick the big soft layer builder. It's kind of like the soft brush, but it has a bit of texture to it. Right now it's really hard to see, but it has a bit more, it's not as soft, so it's a good way to add a bit more texture and variation within the piece while still getting some really nice blending. That being said, like I said, I do want to have a bit more grit myself, so I'm going to use the low ink marker. And here what we're going to do is figure out which side of our character is going to be within or in the shadows. And here what we're going to do is we're going to draw shadows on one side of our character. So I'm going to pretend that my light source is right here, which means all the right side of my character is going to be in the shadows. So I'm just going to quickly paint those. Now we're drawing something cartoon, so your shadows really don't need to be super realistic. Honestly, you just want to make sure that your piece is not super flat. So I'm going to go with something like this. I'm going to draw the inner part of the ears as well. Maybe going, if there's an overlap between two different body parts like I have here between the face and the teeth, adding a shadow there as well. Maybe under the nose. Maybe here I have kind of a, a flap under the eye, maybe adding a shadow there. Definitely on the antlers, so any body part that you have, the right side is going to be shaded. Well, the side opposite to your light, but in my case I'm pretending that it's on the left, so the right side. Great, and once we have that color selected, we're also going to go ahead and add the shadows on the background. So same thing, we're going to create a new layer. We're going to rename it to shadows as well, applying it as a clipping mask so it stays within the background shape, and using the blending mode linear burn. We're going to lower the opacity of this layer roughly around 50% as well, but it does need to be super precise. And we are going to brush over again the right side, of the different elements in the background. Now in the background, we do have this kind of overlapping between the character and the background elements. So the character would be projecting a shadow on those background elements, so you might want to add a bit of a distinction there as well. And you can see here, you really don't need to be precise, it's just adding a bit of texture. It's not realistic shading, we're not talking about the physics of light or anything at this stage. We just want to make our piece pop a little bit. Great, so once you have your shadows, we're going to use a very similar technique for the lights, which is going to be just creating a new layer above the shadows, renaming it to lights, and then applying it as a clipping mask as well. But instead of using the blending mode linear burn, we're going to go with the blending mode add. So add is going to make your colors lighter as opposed to darker. And it is very strong. So we're going to lower the opacity of this one around, 20-30%, but we can always tweak it back later. But yeah, it's going to be quite low. And for your lights, you're just going to pick a super bright color. So I like my lights to be a nice bright yellow, orange. It makes it look like the sun, but you could go with any other color. As long as it's bright, it's going to work. And sticking with the same brush, but probably smaller. This time what you're going to do is on the opposite side of your shadows, on the side of your light source, in my case it was the top left, you're going to outline the different body parts. So something a little bit like this. Now, once you've drawn one light, you might want to go back and play with the opacity of your layer. I realized mine was way too low actually. I lied to you, sorry about that. So I'm going to set it around 40%. But yeah, you're just adding these outlines on the side of your lights. And I know this is not, realistic lighting, but it really does make the piece pop a lot. It's really quite easy. It takes just a few seconds. It makes a big difference. So that's how I personally like to add my highlights. Now, if you have a different technique that you like to use, feel free to go ahead and do that instead. But this is what I'm going to do. And also I like to add sometimes little, I don't know, kind of textured parts to my highlights. So just little dots in this case, to make the piece feel a bit more interesting. Once more, there's no real right or wrong way to do it. It's all about just experimenting, trying stuff. But the core technique is, yeah, just outlining your outlines that are on the side of the light source. And we're going to do the same thing on the background elements as well, of course. So just creating a new layer above the background shadow layer. Renaming this one to lights as well. Applying it as a clipping mask. Setting the blending mode to add and using the opacity that is similar to what you use for your main characters. In my case, I think it was 38. Doesn't need to be exactly that, but you know, you get the idea. Same technique, you're going to outline the outlines that are in the direction of your light source. Great, so just before we move on to the background and the texture, which is really going to bring this whole piece together, we might want to add a bit more color variation within our main character, especially if you have a big area that is just one color like me. So for that, you can just create a layer right above your base shape below the shadow and rename it to extra color or something like that. And picking your color picking, there we go, your base color, and changing it ever so slightly. So for that, I don't recommend you use the harmony tool. You're much better just using this little slider here with the Q and shifting it a little bit towards either the right or the left. Not a big change, just a bit should be enough. And then with the same brush that you used before, you're just going to brush over part of your character to change the color a little bit. So this is not about lighting or shadow, it's really just about changing the color of the base a little bit in some areas to make them more interesting. So you can see here I'm painting with a light orange on some parts of my rabbit. I might actually go ahead, go back to my base color, shift it towards the other side this time, maybe quite a lot actually. Let's experiment. So it's going to be this kind of magenta, painting over another section. So it just adds some interest. That was too much, but you get the idea. You can just go back, and if any area is just too boring, too flat, you can just quickly change the color and brush over just one part of your illustration to make it more interesting as needed. And one more thing you might want to do is change the color of your outline. So remember when we started, I told you don't really worry too much about the color, make sure it's dark. So at this stage, what you can do is select this layer, go in the adjustment panel here at the top, picking hue, saturation, and brightness. You're going to be able to change the hue to make sure that it matches what you have going on well. In my case, I kind of liked what I had. Maybe I could make it a bit more purple actually. But yeah, you can see you can just play with the sliders and experiment until you find an outline color that you like, you're happy with. You could also change the brightness if you need to, maybe the saturation. But yeah, just play with those sliders until you're happy with your line art color. So at this stage, all we have left to do is painting the background and the texture, which is going to make a massive difference, believe it or not. Right now it's a bit boring, but with the background, the texture, it's really going to come together. So for that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer below what is the background layer. It's not really background, it's the background elements, but you get the idea. And we're going to rename that to vignette. So what we're going to do on this vignette layer is just paint a darker section at the bottom of our background and then a lighter section at the top. So you can just color pick the base color and then make it quite a bit darker. And for this, you're going to want to use a soft brush though. So in the airbrushing panel that comes with Procreate, the soft brush, making it very big, or in the texture and grit part of the bundle, picking the big soft layer builder. And all you're going to do is, going to, with a very big version of your brush over the bottom, mostly in the corners of your piece. So essentially we're creating a gradient here. And you can see already, it's barely anything, but it really makes the piece pop a lot. Now we're going to do the opposite for the top. So just color picking the base color and then making it quite a bit lighter. And for that, you might actually also want to change the hue a little bit, so not too much. I'm going to change mine to make it a bit more teal and really just have fun here. But yeah, you're going to brush this time towards the middle part of your top to add some light. And you really don't need a perfect gradient, but if you're super struggling and you just have a bunch of different, crazy lines everywhere, you could always go in the adjustment panel here, selecting the Gaussian blur option right here. And then by moving your finger from the left to the right, you're going to be able to add or take blur off. So my gradient I was pretty happy with, so I'm not going to add a whole lot of blur to it, but if you had, again, a bunch of random strokes and it just looked super patchy, you could add a bunch of blur and just blend everything, as you can see. So I'm going to go, I guess, with that. You can also, in your layer panel, play with the opacity of your vignette layer. If you felt like it was too intense, you can just lower it a little bit. I think mine was fine, but that's always a tool that you have and that you can use. Now the final thing we're going to do is add some texture, which is really going to bring this piece together very nicely. So for that, create a layer above everything, so above your line art, above everything you have, and rename it to, textures. Now for textures, you have so many different ways you could go about it. The first thing I recommend doing is figuring out if you want to add textures that are going to be lighter than the piece or darker than the piece. In my case, I feel like everything is already pretty dark, so I'm going to go with lighter textures, which means I'm going to pick a version of my background color, make it a bit more gray, but a bit more light. Now there's no exact science here, and once more I'm going to show you how to tweak that after fact, but for now just pick either a lighter or darker gray version of your base. And you have a few options in terms of brushes. If you're working with the free Procreate brushes, you could go at the very bottom of the list. You have, for example, materials here, and you have a few noise options and stuff like that. That could work really well. I think in industrial as well, you have a few options, so you could explore those and just try them. Otherwise, if you have my new bundle, you can go and of course pick in the texture and grit pack. Any of those options are going to work really well. I personally absolutely love the speckle option, so that's the one I'm going to pick. You're probably going to want to make your brush quite big, and then all you have to do is paint over your piece. Now you might notice that right now it looks crazy, but that's okay, it's because we haven't applied a blending mode yet. Now here, again, like I was saying earlier, I'm not going to go into all the details about blending mode because I have a full video in which I go through all of them. But with Procreate, it's quite easy. All you have to do is just experiment and kind of go through the list and see if there's one blending mode that you like and use that one. I think I'm gonna go, there's really no right or wrong blending mode to use here. It's all about just seeing what you like, what works with your base color, what works with your top color, all of those things. Actually, I think I'm gonna go with linear light, but lowering the opacity. And like I was saying, you always have the option to, with your texture layer activated, go in the adjustment panel, selecting hue, saturation, brightness, and just like we did for the outlines, play with the coloring of your texture. Now, depending on the blending mode you picked, it might not make a big difference. Like mine, it's barely noticeable if I change the color. Well, yeah, you can kind of see it a little bit. So you can experiment and just find something that you're happy with in terms of your texture, tint, and all of that good stuff. So there you go, that was how to create your own spirit animal illustration. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to learn how to create more illustrations like this, I highly recommend you check out this playlist in which I'm going to teach you exactly that. But before we leave, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos I post every Tuesday and Saturday. And click on the link right here, and I'll meet you there.